Lesson number 6. Alright traders, welcome to the price series lesson. In this lesson, I am going to be showing you how to reference candlestick price data. So you are open, high, low and close. This is obviously going to make up the backbone of most of your script. You are going to need to reference the data very frequently in your script, since what is price analysis without referencing price? So it is quite simple to assess this data. Obviously, the challenge comes with what you do with this data. First of all, let me get rid of the precision one, that is from a previous lesson. So here I have a blank script. Let me save the script to show you. So we are just plotting the closing price onto our chart. So by default, this is the default template for any new script. We already have our closing data being referenced, and to reference the other price points on your chart is as simple as you might think. So let us say we want to get our candle open price. I am going to declare a new variable here called candle open, and it is going to be set to the open price value. Next up, we will get our high. So candle high is set to high. Then we can get our candle low, and then candle close is set to the close. Now you don't normally need to do this. You can just directly reference open, high, low and close in your script. But for today's example, I thought this might be a little more intuitive to see what is going on here. So now let us save the script and let us draw these values onto our chart. So I am going to use a comment here and say draw candle data onto your chart. I am going to paste candle open in there. Copy this and I will paste it 4 times. And I will just paste in each variable here. And let us change the color of each plot, because if I save the script down, we are going to get 4 blue lines drawing onto our chart and we cannot tell what is what. So let us set the color of the open to color do.bl blue. And now I am going to copy this line of code and paste it in. And let us change the color of each data value here. Let us change the high to red. We will change the low to green. And let us change the close to purple and save the script. We should get 4 different colors plotting onto our chart here now, and each color corresponds to each candle price. So it is as simple as that to get our price data, which is what we are doing here. So now let us say we want to do something useful with this data. Let us say we want to get the current bar size in points. So we want to subtract the high from the low. So now let us create a new section of code here, and I will say analyze price data. And for this we are going to create a couple of variables. The first variable we create is going to be called candle size, and to calculate the candle size is really easy. All we need to do is subtract the low from the high. So high minus low will give us our candle size in points. And let us plot this onto our chart as well. So we will call this candle size. We will set this to the color dot orange. And in fact, let us comment out all of our open, high, low, close, because we don't really need to see that data on our chart. Save the script. Should be getting an orange line drawing here now, which is showing the candle size in points or pips in this case. So right now, as I hover over the last bar on my chart here, our candle size is 6.9 pips. So as you can see, it is really easy to analyze price data. Obviously, the more complex analysis you are doing, but it is really simple to assess the data and to analyze it. Let us try something a little bit more complicated to demonstrate the historical operator. So let us say we want to reference a historical bar on our chart. This will reference the current bar and this will run on every bar on our chart. So as I hover my mouse latest over this bar here, which is quite large, if I mouse over that, you can see down here this number says 65.2 pips. So this script is running on each historical bar on our chart. And so every bar on our chart will reference its own open, high, low and close. But what if we wanted to reference, let us say, 10 bars back? So we want to reference 10 bars in the past. Let us go back to our current bar and let us say we want to compare the current bar's candle size to candle size of a bar 10 bars ago. To do that is really simple. Let us just create a new variable here called candle size 10, and we will set that to the high of the bar 10 bars ago minus the low of the bar 10 bars ago. So to reference historical data, we use square brackets and then we pass in a number, an integer number or whole number. This whole number is your look back count. Hi guys, editing Matt here. I just wanted to interject really quickly because I realized while editing this video I forgot to mention that in programming, when we are dealing with things like list of data, which is what this essentially is, we don't start counting from 1, we start counting from 0. So what I mean by that is plotting the closing price of the bar index of 0 onto a chart. If I save this script, that is exactly the same as just plotting the closing price. But if I plot the closing price of the first bar in our price series, and also another thing that is important to mention is that these bar index numbers begin from the last bar on our chart. So we are counting backwards when we are dealing with the price series or historical operator. So the higher this number is, the more bars back we are referencing. And so 0 would be the current bar. That is why if you bring out your measuring tool, if you look down at the bar count here, it says 0 bars on the current bar and then the bar next to it is minus 1 bar. So plotting the closing price of the bar index of 1 means we are plotting the closing price of the bar 1 bar back from the current bar. And so if I put 10 in here, then we are technically plotting the closing price of the 11th bar back from the current bar. So if I count out 10 bars here, that puts us on this bar right here. If I count the bars from this bar to the current bar, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Technically speaking, we are counting back 11 bars from the current bars when we reference 10 because we start from 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. So that is an important thing to mention. When I say something like I am referencing 10 bars ago, I mean historical bars, 10 historical bars ago. It is an important distinction to make because when we get further into the course and we do things like detecting candlestick patterns. It does matter that you get this number correct, obviously, because if you have it even one bar off, that is going to mess up your pattern detection code. But anyway, I thought that was just important to mention in coding in script and all programming languages, all counting of all kinds when dealing with list of data starting from 0. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. 0 counts as 1, and so you have pretty much got to shift everything up a number when dealing with indexes. And that is what this is. This is a bar index. The bar index just means the bar count from the current bar. So this would be a bar index of 0, bar index of 1, bar index of 2, and you get the idea. Anyway, that is just some really important information I need to make you aware of. Let us get back to the lesson. So this will get the candle size of the bar 10 bars ago. So let us compare these two values. To do that, we will say candle size ratio and we will divide our current candle size by the candle size 10 bars ago, and let us plot that onto our chart as well. Candle size ratio with the color of purple. So when I save the script, we will be getting another line drawing onto our chart, that is comparing the current bar size to the bar size 10 bars ago. Save the script, and there we go. So the current bar is 130% the size of the bar from 10 bars ago, or 1.3 times. And it is that simple. That is how we reference historical price data. Very easy. And this historical operator works on any series of data that we can reference the script. So this applies to indicator values as well. It applies to basically anything that has a series of data that we can reference. So for example, let us say we wanted to get the ATR value of the current bar. To do that, we would just create a new variable here called ATR is set to ta.atr, and later just pass in the default 14 length period. So this will get the current ATR value, and let us say we wanted to plot the ATR from 10 bars ago. We can do so just like that. So this plot function now will reference the ATR value from 10 bars ago. Save the script, and now our white number here is drawing the ATR of 10 bars ago. Really simple to reference historical data, and this applies to anything. As I said, we could reference the volume from 100 bars ago if we wanted to. Let us say 234 bars ago. Save the script. Now our white line is the volume from 234 bars ago. There is a limit to how far back you can look. So if I set this to 9999999 and save the script, we will get an error. You can see this little warning sign popping up here. If I click on that, it says too large, max total bars back, and then we have our large number here. The maximum is 300,000 bars, that is 3 lakh bars, which is still quite a lot of bars. So let us set this back to latest 10, save the script, and there we go. So that is how you reference open, high, low, and close data. That is how you reference historical data using the historical series operator. And this technique applies to any value indicator values as well. So if we wanted to compare the ATR from 10 bars ago the same way we did here, we could just say ATR to 10 and then the ATR ratio is ATR divided by ATR 10. This will work just fine the same way this did. Now, obviously, this is a pretty useless example of how to use price series and indicator series in our scripts. But in future lessons, we will be covering more complex, more tactical demonstrations of analyzing price action using this information. And that brings me to the end of this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Lesson number 7. In this lesson, we are going to be covering the fundamental commonly used data types that you will be using in most of your scripts to perform your calculations and analysis. The first data type you are going to be working with in all of your scripts for the most part will be number types. So there are two types of numbers in P script. We have integer type. This is whole numbers. So, for example, 1 would be an integer. This could be 1, 10, 100, 20, whatever. Just as long as it is a whole number and there is no decimal in it, that will be called an integer. Next up, we have float type. This is like an integer except it has a decimal place after it. So, any number with a decimal place is considered a float. The reason this is called a float type is because there is no fixed number of digits before and after the decimal place. So the decimal place can float around and so that is why they call it a float. Programming can be wired like that. Don't ask me why that become a thing, but we will get used to it. So there is a lot of technical jargon you will need to learn in coding. Integers just mean whole numbers. There is more nouns to this. For example, there is a maximum number that an integer can be, but you don't need to know about that because it is extremely unlikely you are going to run into that issue in PineScript. But anyway, moving on, we have our floating point numbers, float type numbers. For example, a closing price is a float because there is a decimal number in it. You can see here on Bitcoin, we have two digits after the decimal place. That means that this price we have it is not another data type. It is just a different way of using floating points. So float type E we call this. And if I were to say 0.1 and then use the mathematical operator E and then put 2 on the end here, what this is saying is written in number or the result of this equation which is 0.1 into 10 raised to 2. Now it is not often you will need to use this if ever, but the option is there if you need to or if you are mathematically inclined. For me personally, I am terrible at math, which is interesting considering I became a trader and programmer. But that is the beauty of modern programming. You don't need to be good at math to be a programmer. But if you are talented at math, this is a tool at your disposal. The next data type we have to work with is what is called Boolean values. So a Boolean data type is simply yes or no, true or false, 1 or 0. In PineScript, it is represented by the word true and the word false. So a bool type or boolean type would look something like this. True for true, false for false. So let me leave that as true. This is quite simple to understand. You will use this data type quite a lot in your scripts. In fact, these first three data types will make up the majority of your scripts in terms of how you calculate stuff. The next data type we have that will be commonly used in color types. So color types in PineScript are their own data type and the reference color data types. You can use the inbuilt data types that PineScript provide. If I type out color and then a full stop and hit control space or command space on a Mac and I scroll down, you can see a list of inbuilt colors here. So if I say color red, that will give the PineScript inbuilt red color as the data type, and this can be passed into any of my drawing tools. So for example, we have got a plot here that is plotting our float type E. If I change this to say color equals color type hopes and I have the script, our line will turn red. That is what color data types are like. You can also use hexadecimal colors. So if I wanted to color this red in hexadecimal, that would look like FF 0000000. If I save that, we get bright red. We will cover hexadecimal colors in a future lesson. You don't need to know them in order to use colors in your script. But if you are familiar with hexadecimal from web development, primarily these are used in web development. So if you are familiar with working on websites, you will know how hexadecimal colors work. Or you can use a hexadecimal color picker. Just look up hex color picker on Google, and this can be an easy way to fill out custom colors in your scripts. One other option we have to work with in PineScript is the color RGB function. This we can pass in 3 values or 4 values, actually red, green, blue and transparency. So for example, if I wanted full red, I could type in 255 dash 0 green dash 0 blue and 0 transparency. So the transparency is optional. If I just put in RGB as 255 0 0 and save the script, this will stay red. Actually, let us change this colors so that we can actually see the difference. So this will now be bright green. There we go, because we have set green to full. So RGB color range from 0 to 255, 0 being none and 255 being the maximum. And if we wanted to change the transparency, let us say we wanted to make the line completely transparent, we could set transparency to 100%. Save the script, and now the line will disappear from our chart, but it is still plotting up here. So that is one way of plotting values onto your chart without the user seeing the actual line being drawn. I use this quite a lot in my scripts to draw information onto the chart that I want to reference in my indicator values, but that I don't want to see the actual chart, such as stop loss sizes and things like that. Don't worry if this was a bit confusing. We will cover color types in future lessons in a great detail and in more practical examples. The next data type we have to work with that you will commonly use in your scripts, not all scripts, but some scripts will be the string data type. So this will be a string type equals text. So string is just what programmers call text, and in order to define it, we need to put two quotation marks on either side of the our text. The reason why we do that is if we just say text here, then PineScript does not know the difference between this and an actual function or variable in our script. If I save the script, we will get an error here. It will say undeclared identifier text. If we put quotation marks around it and save the script, we will get no error because now PES script knows that this is a text. Now you can use quotation marks or you can use single quotation marks as well. That will work just the same. If I save the script, this is treated exactly the same as if we had used quotation marks. So it is really just the matter of preference which one you use. I prefer to use the double quotes personally just because I am used to that from other programming languages. But if you are experienced in a different language and you are used to using single quotes, you can use them in your script if you want to. And just as a side note, while we are here, if you want to include a single quote in your text, you cannot just add another single quote because now that is treating this as a string and then we just have a single quote on its own. If I save the script, we will get an error because we did not close off this string here. If we add a backslash in front of this text, PineScript will now know that we want to include this quote within our string. Then this backslash is telling PineScript we want to include this single quote within our text. So for example, let us change this to a bullish. Now if we were to draw this onto our chart using a label or one other text drawing function, a table or something like that, this text would display on our chart as this. So this quotation would be included in the text and the backslash would be removed. So that is the purpose of the backslash. You can also do things like backslash and that would move bullish onto a new line. And so if we were to draw this on our chart, it would look like this. It is bullish on a new line. There are several escape characters you can use in your strings. We won't cover that in today's lesson because it is outside the scope of this lesson. I am just introducing you to these concepts. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information, and so let us just get rid of all this and go back to text. And we will cover escape characters and stuff like that in future lessons. So before we wrap up this lesson, let us plot all of these types of our chart and we will just have a quick look at which they look like. So we have integer type, float type E and bool type. We cannot plot a boolean directly onto our chart. So we can only plot these numbers at the moment directly onto our chart. So let me change this to color and I will change this to color do as well and we will save the script. So now you can see that we are plotting our integer type as 20. It is just a whole number and then our float type. Let me change my float type to 33.3 and save the script. Now here is our float type 33.30. Now remember in a various lesson I talked about precision of your script because we have two decimal places after our market price. We have two decimal places on our indicator values. So even though I set this number to 33.3, it displays as 33.30. If I did not want that, I could change my precision to 1, save the script, and now it is only plotting to one decimal place. And so here we are plotting our integer number as a whole number, our float number, and then our float type a E number. And in our integer plot, we are passing in our color type. So let us use our bool type here. Let us say if bool type is true, then let us overwrite our color type to color dot red. So now when I save the script, this color here, this plot will turn to red because bool type is set to true, and we just said if bool type is true, override color type with the color red. And override something, we need to use the colon equals symbol. We cannot just use equals because that is declaring a new variable. We want to override this variable with this new one. And don't worry, we will cover this in future lessons. I am just showing this to you before we wrap this lesson up, how bool types work. So now if I save the script, this color will turn red because bool type is true. And we have overwritten our color with red. If I change this to false, the color will go back to green because bool type is no longer true. Save the script. There we go. So that is it for this lesson. There are several data types here that we will work with. These are the common data types. There are other data types too, like tables, labels, drawing objects, things like that. But we will cover those in future lessons once you become more familiar with the basics of PineScript. So don't worry if you are overwhelmed by any of this lesson. Throughout the course, we will be using all of these data types quite regularly in practical scenarios, and over time you will learn how they all work and how you can use them in your own scripts. So that will do it for this lesson. I hope you are enjoying the course so far, and if you are, stick around because it is about to get a lot more interesting. Lesson number 8. Hi, welcome back to another PineScript lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be covering how to appropriately or correctly declare your variables in your scripts. So, variables are used in all programming languages. We have already covered a few examples of them. In this lesson, we are just going to keep things simple and cover the basic fundamentals of variable declaration. In order to declare a variable, we need to basically give it a name, and then that name is like a key. So we have a key and a value. So in today's example, we are going to be counting candles in our chart. So I want to count how many green candles are on my chart. So I am going to say green candle count is set to 0. So right here we have declared a variable. We have declared a variable with the name or key green candle count, and we have given it the value 0. Now script will automatically determine what data type your variable is based on what value you give it. So PineScript knows that 0 without any decimal places is an integer value, a whole number value. So whatever we do with this variable will be treated as an integer value. If we were to add a decimal place like 0.1, suddenly this becomes a float. And now whatever we do, this variable needs to be governed by the rules of floating point numbers. And there are certain things you can and cannot do with these data types. So it is important that you understand how the data types work. The good news is you will pick this up throughout the course. It is not particularly complex, but it is important that you understand how data types work. Now you can explicitly tell PineScript what type of variable you want. For example, if you wanted to tell PineScript that this green candle count needs to be a float, we can just add the word float in front of it and save the script. And now the Pine script knows that even though there is a decimal place after this whole number value, this essentially becomes 0.0. Pine script is now treating this as a floating point number even though we give it an integer value. Now if we were to change this to text, for example a string, this won't work. If I save the script, Pine script says the declare type float is not compatible with the assigned type string. So whatever data type you give it, you need to make sure it is accurate. But the option to explicitly define what data type your variable is possible using these data type operators. So this can be useful in certain situations. For example, if I get rid of this and I set candle count to NA or not a number, this is basically null, nothing. I have set the green candle count to literally nothing. It is not a data type of any kind. If I then want to draw that onto my chart, so let me paste the green candle count into that plot. Save the script. Line 7 value with any type cannot be assigned to a variable that was defined without a type keyword. So we cannot declare green candle count as NA. But if we add float on the end and save the script, this will now compile and we are now plotting NA onto the chart. So that is one useful way of declaring a data type with nothing as it is initial value. So we don't want this to be 0. We want this to be nothing. The only way to do that is to explicitly give this variable a type keyword. But we don't usually need to do this. So I am going to get rid of that and set this back to 0 and save my script. So now we are plotting just 0 onto a chart on every bar. Now let us say that we want to count every green bar on our chart. To do that, we need to check if the closing price is greater than the opening price, then set green candle count to green candle count plus 1. Now notice that I used the colon equals operator here and I did not just set equals. Now the reason for this is because once a variable is already declared, in order to override the value that we have given this variable, we need to use the equals, the colon equals operator to reassign this variable to a new value. So for example, if I set this to 50 and I save the script, we will still be plotting 0 here and we get an error or a warning. This orange writing down here is a warning, not an error. It is just bringing to our attention that maybe we made a mistake. It says here that shadowing variable green candle count exists in the parent scope. Did you want to use the assign operator instead of the initialize operator or equals? So when you are first declaring a variable, you need to use the equals that initializes the variable. You cannot use the assign variable until the variable already exists. So if I save the script now, we get an error that green candle count is an undeclared variable. So the equal sign is for declaring a new variable and the colon equals is for reassigning an existing variable a new value. So now if I change this to colon equals instead of plotting 0 onto our chart like we do here, if I use the colon equals, we will now be plotting 50 because our green candle count is being overwritten with the number 50 but only on bullish bars. So let us say we want to count all the green bars on our chart. to do that, we need to set green candle count to green candle count plus 1. So that will increment this variable by 1. It will get whatever its current value is and add 1 to it. So let me save the script here, and you will notice that on each bullish bar on our chart we were only drawing 1 onto the chart, and the bearish bars we draw 0. The reason for this is that our variables are redeclared on every new bar on our chart. So every time a new bar, historical or real time, begins drawing onto our chart, our script code is run all over again. It just keeps looping our code. So every time our script runs, green candle count is set to 0. And so it never gets past 1 because on every new bar this code is run again. Green candle count is reset back to 0 and then incremented by 1 on bullish bars. If we want this variable to not update on new bars but to persist across all of the bars on our chart, we need to use the V operator. So we convert this green candle count variable into what is called a persistent variable. So this variable will now persist across all of the bars on our chart. And so whenever we detect a green bar, the green candle count will increment by 1. Whenever we encounter a red or bearish bar, nothing will happen because our little if statement here will not be true. And don't worry, we will cover if statements in more detail in future lessons. But for now, if I save this script, we will now be counting every green bar over historical price data. So if I save the script there, you can see that our line is incrementing slowly from bottom left to top right. If I reset my chart and hover over this last bar on my chart, we have 11,771 bullish bars on our chart from whenever our historical price action began. So that is the purpose of the variable. Now the reason not all variables are because let us say we want to draw a shape whenever we detect a bullish bar. If I change draw shape to true and then we use the plot shape function and we pass in our draw shape variables. If I save the script, now you can see on XPlotting in our box whenever a bar is bullish. So for every green bar here we have an X. If I change it draw shape to a V variable and I click save, all of these bars will have an X above them. Because the very first time we detect a bullish bar, draw shape will be set to true and it will never reset back to false because we are using a V variable. So let me save the script here to show you what I mean. Here you can see we have all these X. If I go back to the very first bar on my chart using the Alt G shortcut here, you can see that the very first bar on our chart is bullish. And so draw shape is set to true and it is never set back to false because this is a persistent variable. And so we draw X on every single bar. If I get rid of V and save the script, now draw shape is reset on every new bar on our chart. And we want that to happen in this case for this particular variable. Because we want to be reset on every new bar. We want each new bar to be considered as a brand new calculation. So that is why not all variables are persistent with this V tag, and we need to explicitly tell Pine script when we want a variable to be saved across all of the bars on our chart. This V can be useful for all kinds of things such as saving your stop loss and target until one is hit and drawing that onto the chart. It can be useful for keeping track of certain market conditions. So for example, you want to check when the RSI goes overbought. So you would set your V variable to true when the RSI goes overbought, and then you want to wait for a bearish candle, and once that happens maybe you enter short for example, and then maybe you reset your RSI flag or your RSI overbought monitoring variable. Those are some practical use cases for this variable type. But let us get rid of our draw shape variable here for a moment, and let us just count every single bar on our chart. To do that, we can rename our variable to total bars and get rid of our if statement and get rid of this and just plot total bars down here. Now, before we continue, we should probably quickly go over the naming conventions for variables. The most important thing you need to know is that variables cannot start with a number. So if we change this to one total bars and save the script, we get an error down here because you cannot start a variable name with a number. You can have it after text. So we could say T1 0 bars and save the script. That will work just fine. You could have any number on the end of your variable name and that will work just fine. You can have an underscore in front of your name, your variable name, and that will be okay. You cannot use any other symbol, so we could not use a dollar sign for example. That will give us a compile error. So you can only use underscores and text to begin your variable name, and you can have numbers and underscores in your variable names, but that is as creative as you can get with your variable names. So that is important to keep in mind. But anyway, let us wrap this lesson up by counting how many bars in total have drawn onto our chart. To do that, all we need to do is increment our total bars by 1 whenever our script runs on a new bar. So let us save the script and save how many bars due onto our chart. There you can see a diagonal line all the way from bottom left to top right. You can see that we have had 23,553 bars plotted onto our chart in total. You could also get this number by using the bar course index. So if I plot that onto a chart, you can see we get the same number minus 1. The reason to that is that everything in programming starts from 0, and so the very first bar on our chart is considered bar index 0, and our script would have incremented our total bars to 1. So in our script's case, let us plot total bars with a color purple and save the script. Now we will get two lines drawing offset by 1. So if I hover my mouse over this very first bar, you can see that our script says that this is bar number 1, whereas bar index says it is bar number 0. The reason for that is that our total bar numbers is incremented on the first bar, whereas bar index is not. It is only incremented after that bar is finished drawing. So it starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, so on all the way to our final bar. And our total bar starts from 1 and counts all the way up to the last bar. So that about does it for our variable declaration rules and fundamentals. We will be covering variable declaration in quite some detail in the lessons to come and in much more practical use cases. So again, if this is all brand new to you and you are a little bit overwhelmed, don't worry. Just keep going through this content and eventually it will start to click. But with that said, that brings me to the end of this lesson. I will see you in the next one where we will cover getting user input in your scripts. See you there. Lesson number 9. What I am about to show you is a bit of an advanced concept. So if this goes over your head, don't worry about it. Just keep moving on with the course. But for those of you who are experienced at coding, you need to know this early on. And for those of you who are not experienced with coding, this won't really affect you until you start developing complex scripts. So don't worry about it too much just yet. If this is the first scripting language you are learning, don't panic if this information goes way over your head. It is not something you need to worry about just yet, but it is important to know. So I want to briefly cover this early on before we start building out more complex scripts. Something important to mention about PineScript version 6, which was recently released as of recording this video, is that when we are dealing with boolean operators, which remember is true or false values. If I have something like this, let us say I have test boolean equals, and let us say I want to check if the current bar closes higher than the previous bar's high. So a higher close, I would say close greater than high. And now let us say I also want this bar to be the highest bar over the past 10 bars. So I would say and high equals TAEST high 10. This would check does the current bar close higher than the previous bar's high, and is the current bar the highest high over the past 10 bars. This bar right here would meet that condition. It closes higher than the previous bar's high, and it is the highest bar over the past 10 bars. Now the issue is with this statement, and the reason this is highlighted or underlined in orange is this function needs to be checked on every single bar on my chart in order to generate a correct value. So this function needs to run every time my script executes in order to be accurate. In version 5 of PineScript, this would work just fine. But in version 6, we would have a problem. In version 5, this entire statement would get executed regardless of whether one check failed. But in version 6, PineScript uses what is referred to as lazy evaluation. The script runtime engine is as lazy as possible when evaluating the statement. And what will happen is if the current bar does not close higher than the previous bar, then this code never gets executed or checked at all. In version 5, both of these checks would be run simultaneously, regardless of whether one failed. In version 6, this function no longer gets run on every single bar. It only gets run on bars where the close is higher than the previous bar's high, which means this function will start giving incorrect values on some bars. And if I bring up the compiler here and save my script, we have a warning, the TA highest. The highest function call inside the conditional expression might not execute on every bar, which can cause inconsistent calculations because the function depends on historical results. For consistency, assign the cause result to global variable and use that variable in the expression instead. What this means is, in order to get this code to execute consistently on every single bar, I need to take this function, create a new variable here called float highest bar equals, and then I can paste that in. And now what I need to check is, does the current bars high equal this variable here? So I have extracted this function from this line of code from this conditional statement, and it is now global variable. This variable is initialized on every single bar on my chart, no matter what every single tick that my script runs. And now we are checking the current bar's high value against that variable no matter what. So if this check fails, it doesn't affect this function anymore, and this code here will just not be run, and that makes our script execute faster and more efficiently on the TradingView servers. So that is something to be aware of. It is a trap that you may fall into in your coding if you are not aware of this functionality of PineScript. So again, this is a bit of an advanced concept. This went way over your head. Don't worry, just keep going on with the course. It is not something that will really impact you until you start developing complex scripts. But it is something I want to mention, especially for the more experienced coders. They are just to be aware of this functionality in PyScript so that you don't fall into this trap when you are developing more complex scripts. So in short, when you are working on a script, if you ever see a warning like this that says assign the cause result to a global variable, that is what this means. It means take that function out of your line of code and assign it to a global variable, and that is what this would look like. Lesson number 10. Hi traders, in this lesson I am going to be showing you the fundamental concepts that you need to know regarding alerts in PineScript. So there are two ways to trigger alerts in PineScript. Both ways depend on Boolean triggers. So true or false triggers. If the trigger is true, an alert is fired. If it is false, no alert is triggered. So for today's example, we are going to keep it extremely simple. We will cover practical alerts for things like setup detection indicator conditions, that sort of thing in future lessons. For now, I am just going to give you an overview of the basic functionality of alerts. So to do that, we are going to create a really simple alert condition. For this lesson, we are going to detect higher closes and lower closes. So SC is going to stand for higher close, and that is just going to check, does the current bar close higher than the previous bar's high. And then lower close is the same but the opposite. Does the current bar close lower than the previous low? And this is the first time you are seeing the greater than and less than operators. In a future lesson, in the next section, we will cover all of the different math operators and PineScript operators we have to work with. Don't worry about that for now. Basically today we are just dealing with two Boolean variables, high close, lower close. If the current bar closes higher than the previous high, high close is said to be true. Otherwise it is said to false. And the same for lower close, but the opposite. It needs to close lower than the previous bar's low. And so now we have two different ways we can trigger alerts with these variables. The first way is to use the alert function. The second way is to use the alert condition function, and I will go over the differences now. So first of all, let us use the alert function. The way this works is an alert function triggers an alert as soon as it is called. So for example, if we check if SC is equal to true, fire out alert, and this alert function takes two parameters, message which is a string and frequency which is an inbuilt variable or built-in variable. So we have three options here, once per bar, once per close, and both of these options basically. So if we set this to once per bar close, this alert will only fire if the current bar closes as a higher close bar, and the message can be anything. So we could make our string anything. I am going to say here that this bar close higher than previous bar, and then I am going to add a colon on the end, and then I am going to add on the current closing price of the bar to our alert. So to do that, we need to use the toString function, because you cannot add a number directly to a string, and we need to use the str namespace here. We will go over namespaces in a future lesson, but we need to say string and then pass in our number, and this will convert the current closing price into text into a string. And so when we get a higher close bar that closes, so our alert frequency is set to once per bar close. If we get a high close bar, an alert will be fired with this text. So that is one way we can trigger alerts. It is quite simply really. And now you don't need to specify these parameters here. The function will assume that the first parameter you give it is a string. So we could get rid of message equals, and it will also assume that the next parameter will be a alert frequency. So we can get rid of that. So we have our alert function triggering with a string argument and a frequency argument only on high close bars. We could do the same for lower close. I could copy this string, paste it in there, change that to lower, and now we have got an alert firing on a lower close candle. And just to demonstrate that we can do it, let us change this to a frequency once per bar. So this will not wait for the bar to be confirmed. It won't wait for the bar to close. So there is one way to fire alerts, and it is my preferred way to trigger alerts in my scripts. But there is also another option here, and that is the alert condition function. So this alert condition function cannot be placed in an if statement. It needs to be in your main script scope. So it cannot be in an if statement. It needs to be in your main script's sort of body of text. So it needs to be checked on every single bar on your chart. And this function takes three parameters instead of two. The first is the condition, the boolean condition to trigger the function. So in this case, if we wanted to trigger an alert for higher closes, we would pass in SC, comma, that is our condition. If SC is true, then the alert will fire, and then we have our title. So here I am going to say higher close alert, and then we have our message. So for this I am just going to say the same thing here. This bar close higher than the previous bar. Let us save the script and make sure that compiles. And there we go. No problems there. Now how this will work is on our real-time bar on the current bar on our chart. This alert condition function will check is SC true. If it is, then fire an alert with the title higher close alert and the message this bar close higher than the previous bar. Now there are a couple of differences between these functions. The first important one is that we cannot just add on our closing price as a string here the same way we can use with this alert function. If I save this script now, we will get an error. Cannot call alert condition with argument message equals and then our series string. So a series string just means a string that can change based on certain conditions. So the closing price can obviously change at any time. The alert condition function does not accept any parameter that can change at any time. It needs a constant string, meaning a string that never changes, such as this right here. The only exception with this is that we can use placeholder tags. So if I come up to the alert button here and click on that and I scroll down to the bottom here, you can see this text here. You can use special placeholders such as close, time, plot 0, etc. If you click on this little question mark button here, you can see all of the different placeholders we can use in our alerts, and there are quite a few of them. When we are using the alert condition function, the placeholder tags are the only way to put in variables that change. So for example, if we wanted to put in the closing price, we would need to do two curly brackets and then write close and then two close curly brackets. These placeholder would be replaced by trading view when the alert fires with the current closing price. So now if I save the script and we come up the alert button and I select our script alerts, if I click on this little drop down box here, you will see that we have our any alert function call as an option. That is the function here. So we could set up an alert so that either of these get fired, or we can select our higher close alert, which is our alert condition. So if I click on that and I say once per bar and turn off my web hook, we will cover web hooks in a future lesson. Don't worry about them for now. But if I just set an alert as this is right now, I have set it to once per bar. Because the current bar's price is greater than the previous bar's high, this alert should fire immediately. So let me click create. We will wait for price action to move. As soon as price action moves, there we go, our alert is fired. So you can see when I hover over alert, it says this bar close higher than the previous bar and then it has the closing price. So our little placeholder here was replaced with the closing price. You could also put in the sticker if you wanted to. So now if I save the script and set a new alert and select higher close alert and click create, now we have a new alert that fired, and you can see that it now says the market, the ticker ID of the market that fired this alert. So that is how you pass in dynamic information into your alert condition functions. The alert function on the other hand is a lot easier to pass in information. So this particular function is definitely the preferred method for dealing with third party APIs. For example, to trade automation using trading view alerts. You would be better off using this alert function if you can. This alert condition, on the other hand, is greater for manual alerts because you can give each alert a title. So, for example, I could copy this, paste it down here, change this to lower close, and change the condition to our lower close variable. Change that to lower. So, here is our lower close alert. And then let us say we want to merge both of these. So, we want to say if we have a higher close or we have a lower close, then we have a HCLC alert, and then we could just say this bar close higher or lower than the previous bar. Now if I save the script and we come up to the alert dialog and select our script, when I click on this drop down box, we have three different alerts to choose from. Here we have a high close, lower close alert, high close alert and lower close alert with their own titles. So this is really useful for setting manual alerts in your scripts. So you have a script that is designed to help traders trade your script manually. You want to detect things like a certain candlestick patterns or certain indicator conditions, that sort of thing. This is a great way to separate your alerts with a title to make it more intuitive for the user. Whereas this any alert function call will literally fire for any alert function call that we put in our script. Now if I were to create this alert, nothing would happen because I have set my alert frequency to once per bar close. So we would have to wait for the bar to close higher than the previous bar for this to fire. Let me get rid of this close out of our alert frequency. So this should now fire immediately as soon as I set an alert on any alert function call. So let me first click show pop-up and then click create. We will see what happens. There we go. An alert just fired on the euro dollar. It fires based on the any alert function call condition. And we get our text here that we wrote out here. So this bar close higher than the previous bar, and then we have our bar price, our closing price. So for example, let us say we wanted to pass the current RSI value to our alert as well. We could replace this bar close higher than the previous bar and then set the RSI value in there. So now it will tell us the current RSI value when we set our alert. So let me select alerts, leave that as it is, click create. There we have it. Now you can see our RSI value. Now there is a lot of decimal places here. I will show you in future lessons how you can truncate or cut excess decimal places of your alerts. But for now that is not important. You can see that the current RSI value over the 14 period is 68.62 or 63 if we round it up, and that is really all you need to know for alerts. We have these two methods for setting alerts. Both have their pros and cons. The pros for the alert function is that we can easily pass in values. So price values, indicator values, third party syntax for sending your alerts to a service that automates your trades based on your alerts. If you are using a service like that, they will require a certain syntax for your alerts. So for example, you might need to say set my stop loss to, and then in here you could set to string your stop loss price, and then you might need to put in a comma take profit equals, and then put in your takeout price, etc. And then you could send this information to a third party API using a webhook using this. So for example, I have been using Pine Connector recently to automate some of my trading strategy scripts. If I send the right syntax in an alert message to this URL using the TradingView alert functionality, PineScript will automatically manage my trades for me based on the commands I give it in my alert message. And I can pass in my stop loss price, break even, distance, traveling stops, limit order, entry prices, all that sort of thing, just using these techniques that you see right here. So that will do it for this particular lesson on alerts. This is the basic functionality of alerts. We will cover more detailed practical applications of this information in future lessons, especially when we get into setup, detection, and indicator conditions, that sort of thing. So I hope you found this lesson interesting, and I will see you in the next one.